everyone, and welcome back to the American Center Tashkent's virtual chat chat. My name is Gulshan, and I'm with American Center Tashkent, and will be moderating this program. We're live on our Facebook and YouTube, and we welcome everyone to join and participate in live discussion. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy Tashkent, Mr. Paul Poletes. Sir, hello, and it's our great honor to have you here, and thank you for your time to do this talk for us.
Thank you very much, Gulshan. And, this is the second time I've done a chai chat. I did one 10 and a half years ago when I came to visit Uzbekistan when I was working in Washington, D.C. So I'm very happy to be back. And even if we're doing it virtually, but it's still very nice to be able to speak to all of you. And I look forward to talking, and I hope we get some good questions from the viewers.
Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit about you to everyone. Mr. Poletes is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, and since joining the Foreign Service in 1998, he has completed assignments in Athens, Dhaka, Bishkek, Tirana, Ashgabat, Riga, and Washington, D.C. So we're going to hear a lot of interesting things from those places today. Mr. Poletes is married with two wonderful children, and he also has a cat, and he likes biking. So we are looking forward to hear about all that interesting stuff you have in your life. So thank you so much, Paul, and over to you.
Thank you very much. So what I thought I would do today is talk for a little bit about all the places that I've worked in the State Department since I joined the Foreign Service in 1998. And I'll go through a few pictures from all of the places I've worked. And you'll see that I've spent time in, I'll list all the places, but I've worked more in Central Asia than anywhere else. This is the third time that I've worked in Central Asia. This is actually when I came to Uzbekistan this year or last year in July. It was the fourth time that I had visited Uzbekistan. I came here once 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago on an official visit. And then I came two more times with my family for tourist trips. And we went to Samarkand and Bukhara and Khiva when we were living in Turkmenistan. And then we came this summer for our fourth time. So as Gulshan noted, I joined the Foreign Service in 1998. But before that, I grew up in South Dakota. You can see on the map the star. South Dakota is up. It's not far from Canada. And the nearest, I'd say, really large city is probably Chicago, which is about 9 hours away. And South Dakota is a small state. There are only about 800,000 people there. So it's much smaller than Tashkent. And you'll see a picture of a famous, not real, it's a make-believe animal from South Dakota. We call it a jackalope, which combines a rabbit with horns from an antelope or a deer, and we call it the jackalope. But it's not real. It's just a make-believe South Dakota animal. But in 1989, when I was still in college, I moved to Washington, D.C. for the summer, and I was working in an office there with someone who had just joined the State Department. And she told me that, she said, if you pass the Foreign Service exam, you can become a diplomat and you can live all over the world. You can work in really interesting places. And I thought that sounded like a great job. So I tried. The next year, when I turned 21, you had to be 21 to take the Foreign Service exam. And I took the exam and I didn't pass. And then I took it again a few years later and I didn't pass again. And then finally, the third time that I took the Foreign Service exam, I passed. And then in 1997, I finished the second part of the exam because there are two parts to it. And then in 1998, I started working in the State Department. And I was in training for 1 year. And then after that, I went to Greece for my first assignment. Now, Greece I think a lot of people know some things about Greece. Of course, you've got ancient Greece and the Acropolis, and it's seen as the birthplace of democracy. I was really interested in going to Greece because my family was from there. My father's parents moved to the United States from Greece, and so I have a lot of relatives there, and so I had always wanted to go there. And my wife and I, we went there. We didn't have any children then, and so we spent a lot of time traveling around Greece. What I found was so interesting is you had beautiful islands like Santorini in this picture, but then some of you may have seen in one of the James Bond movies, I forget which one, these monasteries that are on top of a mountain, and it's called Meteora, and it's one of the most beautiful places I've been in the world. And they have these monasteries, and you can drive to most of them now, but some of them you have to climb upstairs to get there. And it was just a place I'd never seen or heard of before, and we drove there quite a few times. And what I also found was interesting about Greece was that Greece had a very interesting and complicated relationship with the United States. There were a lot of very many Greeks who live in the United States, and there were a lot of Americans who lived in Greece, but we had a very complicated relationship. There were a lot of demonstrations in front of the American embassy when I was there. A lot of people were very critical. They criticized the United States a lot, but Greece and the United States were important allies. We're both in NATO, and it was just a fascinating place to work. And then my parents came to visit when we were there, but my father had been there many times to visit his relatives. And I thought in some ways that was the best part of working there, was that I had a lot of relatives there, and I was able to spend a lot of time with them, which I thought was great. But I was in Greece for 2 years. I worked in the consular section on visas for 1 year, and then I worked in the administrative section for 1 year, where I was issuing in the administrative section, where I went and looked for houses for all the Americans who worked at the embassy, and I did that for my second year. In 2001, I left and I went to Bangladesh, and I worked in the public affairs section there. So I worked in the ACT every day. I worked in the same building as the ACT, and I did a lot of work with exchange programs and with university students. Dhaka, Dhaka was the capital of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is the most crowded country in the world. And when you look at some of these pictures of traffic in the capital, they used to, a lot of people would ride in, they call these rickshaws. You don't have so many rickshaws anymore. They're mostly cars there now, and then motorcycles, and not so many rickshaws. The government banned rickshaws from a lot of roads because they would clog up the road. But it was, I had never been to India or Bangladesh or Pakistan or anywhere in South Asia. And so I just thought it was a very interesting place. And the people were incredibly friendly. I really loved working with Bangladeshis. And then I think in this picture in the corner, I went to visit a private university, and they gave me some flowers. The Bangladeshis were wonderful, very hospitable people. And I was there also for 2 years. And then in 2003, I had learned Russian when I was in college, and then I lived in Moscow for a while after college. And so I really wanted to go to a place where I could use Russian language. And so I found opportunity to go in 2003 to Kyrgyzstan. And I worked there for 2.5 years. And Kyrgyzstan, the big difference with Kyrgyzstan was that we had children by then. When we got there, my daughter, Sasha, was 8 months old. And then our son was born while we were also working in Kyrgyzstan. The things that I really liked, I worked in the political section in Kyrgyzstan, and it was a very interesting time. The politics was very interesting. President Akayev fled the country. They had a revolution while I was there. But we really like to spend a lot of time outdoors. The Kyrgyzstan is very mountainous, as you know, a very mountainous, beautiful country. So all of these pictures came from a trip that we took to the lake Karakol and to a park called Jedi Oguz, and it means seven bulls. and because you can see the seven, they look like the humps on the back of a bull or a cow, and so that was what the park was named after. And here, this is my daughter wearing her sunglasses, sitting on the ground having a picnic, and then we went to the animal markets in Karakul, and Sasha was maybe a little bit afraid of the animals, but she enjoyed it. But Kyrgyzstan, again, the people were incredibly friendly there. It just had, and that was my first time that I had ever been to Central Asia, which we found was very, very interesting. It really got me interested in the region, and I think now I wouldn't be working here now if I hadn't gone to Kyrgyzstan probably in 2003, because it really was my introduction to this region and how interesting it is. Unfortunately, when I worked there, I was not able to come and visit Uzbekistan. We came quite close to the border a few times, but weren't able to come and visit. So in 2006, I left from Kyrgyzstan and went back and worked in the United States for 2 years. And I was working at the Montenegro desk in Washington, which meant that I was the main person in the State Department for our relationship with Montenegro, which at that time was the newest country in the world. So it was a very interesting job. I did that for 1 year. And then the second year, I studied Albanian, because then we left in 2008 and went to Albania. And just a few pictures from Albania. You can see that there's a picture of my father when he came to visit, and then my son, who was 2 years old when we got to Albania. And this was a really beautiful town outside of Tirana. It was called Kruja, and this is an old Ottoman market, because Albania was part of the Ottoman Empire for quite a while. And we went out there quite often because it was close to Tirana. But say if you see the other picture in the other corner, this was called Gjirokastër. It's a very old city, and it's all the buildings there are made out of local stone, and that's what it's known as, is the city of stone. There was the most famous author in Albanian history was Ismail Kadare, and he was from Gjirokastër, and he wrote a book called Chronicles of Stone, and that was about Gjirokastër. And it was quite far from Tirana, but we drove down there quite often because we liked it so much. And then just one picture, this pyramid, it was built. You may have heard of during the communist times, the president, the dictator in Albania was Enver Hoxha, and he was a very cruel and ruthless president, and he was in power from 1945 until 1990. And when he died, they built this pyramid to be a memorial to him. But after the communist government left, they turned it into a cultural center. But a lot of people thought it was the ugliest building in the world. I think there was a contest one year, and some architects named it the ugliest building in the world. And then there was a very controversial building. A lot of people wanted to tear it down because they thought that it was really ugly, and it was from the communist era. No one wanted it, but they eventually, I think they turned it into a cultural center, and it's still there today. But Albania, I was the head of the political section there. So it was, Albania was a very pro-American country. We had a very good relationship with Albania, and it was very interesting. I went to the parliament a lot. I would go and meet with the foreign minister and with ministers. We traveled a lot, and it's a great place to be with children, because Albanians, I think, are similar to people in Uzbekistan. They really love being with children. They like seeing children, and it was a good place because some countries they don't like it if you take children to restaurants. Well, in Albania, they love it if you bring all your children to the restaurant. And our children were very young there. They both learned how to speak Albanian. Unfortunately, they forgot Albanian after we left, but it was a good family assignment. And also, Albania, it's a small country, and it was sandwiched between Greece, and Serbia and Italy. And so there had been a lot of The ancient Greeks had been in Albania, the Romans had been there. So it had a lot of influences from different empires over the years. And that just made it a very interesting mix of different cultures and histories. And we really loved Albania. The politics and the history there were very interesting. So after Albania, we went back to Washington, D.C. again, and I worked actually in the Central Asian Affairs Office there for 2 years. And then I studied for 1 year at the National Defense University. And after that, we went to Turkmenistan in 2014. So in Turkmenistan, I was the deputy chief of mission there, and the embassy is much smaller than the embassy here in Tashkent. And what I liked about working in Turkmenistan, I think a lot of people have heard that, they call it the marble city. Ashgabat is a really interesting place, and just the culture and the history there, I found were interesting. And there's no, I think every country in the world is unique, but in some ways Turkmenistan is even more unique because Ashgabat is such an interesting city with the architecture, the way that it's been built, and I've never seen any place like it. And just with a few of these pictures, you may have heard of the fire crater. They call it Darvaza, or the fire crater that has been burning since 1974, maybe even longer. And we went and visited that finally at night, and on the one hand, it's an ecological disaster. So, we shouldn't celebrate this hole in the ground because there's a lot of gas coming out of it, and it's bad for the environment. But and I think the government has said now they want to fill the hole up and close it off. But it was probably the most interesting tourist location in all of Turkmenistan, and so we finally went there. Outside of Ashgabat, the former president Niyazov, he built a sidewalk that's about 50 kilometers long that goes through the mountains outside of Ashgabat, and they call it the Health Walk. And but it was a beautiful place to go for a walk up in the hills above the city. Ashgabat is a little bit like Tashkent, where if you go just a few miles outside of the city, you can start to get, it's like going out to Sukok or Zarkent. You can see the hills and then the mountains. And that was somewhat similar in Ashgabat. And so we often went out there to the health walk, but it was always empty. There was almost nobody there ever, except for the people who were cleaning it and then the police who were working there. But one of the things that I found most interesting about Turkmenistan was that I as the deputy chief of mission, or a lot of times I was the chargé d'affaires, the временный поверенный в делах. As the chargé d'affaires, I had to go to a lot of events where they invited all the ambassadors, and then the president of Turkmenistan would be there too. So this was an opening of a new store, and President Berdimuhamedov was talking about these fruits, different fruits and vegetables. And then another event, they opened a train line that went from Iran through Turkmenistan into Kazakhstan. And so there was an event at the border with Iran, and we all took the train to the border, and they had the President Rouhani, President Berdimuhamedov, and President Nazarbayev were all there at the same time for the ceremony. And a lot of I was the chargé d'affaires at the time, so we took the train to that, and it was that was interesting. But we liked in Turkmenistan, we liked to go camping. We took some trips where we drove across the country. This event, unfortunately, when I pasted the picture, it cut off the picture. There was a President Berdimuhamedov and President Obama. They had both of their pictures. This was during Culture Days when we brought American musical groups and performers to Turkmenistan to perform. This was a musical concert. This picture, I was planting trees with some other diplomats, and the president, when President Berdimuhamedov was there, he used this wheelbarrow and this watering can. But then after he left, a lot of the diplomats went over and we took our picture with that. And then you see my kids in front of the sign. It says, "Be careful for camels crossing the road." That was when we drove. Actually, we drove from Ashgabat all the way to Hiva, one time, and when we were driving across Turkmenistan, we stopped at that sign. And then this picture actually in the middle was actually taken in Uzbekistan when we came to Bukhara and Samarkand for a trip, and my children, my daughter in the middle, and my son, and then their friend, they wanted to try on these hats. I don't think we bought any hats, but they wanted to try them on. So after, I think the deputy chief of mission, it has a reputation, I think, sometimes for being the most difficult job in the Foreign Service, but I thought it was probably the most interesting job because you get to do a lot of it. You meet interesting people, you get to travel a lot, and you get to know, I think, everything that's going on in the embassy. And there's a lot of responsibility in that job because you are responsible for the safety and the security and the welfare of every single person in the embassy. And it's a big responsibility, but it's also a very interesting job because you get to do so many things. So after Ashgabat, I decided that I wanted to be a deputy chief of mission again somewhere else. And so I was lucky that I was able to go to Latvia, and in 2017. And Latvians are very proud of their heritage and their culture, and the food is very important for them too. And I would say the most Latvian food there is rye bread. So we went one time with a group of people from the embassy, and we went to the bakery where they bake all of the bread. And of course, I think Latvian bread, rizki chlieb was, the Latvian rye bread was famous in the whole Soviet Union. And so we went to the biggest bakery in Latvia, and this is my wife making a loaf of rye bread before she put it in the oven. And also Latvia is very well known for having lots of bogs and swamps. And so we took a special tour. You can see the shoes that we're wearing. They're like snowshoes, but they're made for walking on the bog where they grow cranberries there. And so we went on a tour with other people from the embassy and walked across the bogs in Latvia. And Latvians, they really like being outdoors because Latvia, is very far north, and the summer is very short there, and the winter is very long. So Latvians, they really like to go skiing and skating in the winter, and then in the summer they like to go and pick cranberries. They love picking mushrooms, and so we spent a lot of time outdoors picking mushrooms and picking berries in the forest. So I decided when I was in Latvia that I wanted to do one more job as deputy chief of mission, and this job here came open. And so I was very fortunate. It's not easy to get deputy chief of mission jobs. There's a lot of competition for these jobs, and I was very fortunate that I was able to come here. So this last summer, at the end of July, we came here. The big difference was that this tour, my daughter, she's now in university in the United States, so she did not come with us to Uzbekistan. Now, she was just here a few weeks ago for holiday vacation, but she is studying in the United States. So we're here only with our son now. And and so I've only been here, for 6 months, and it's a little harder to travel because of COVID. So there's a few more restrictions on what we can do. I'm hoping to be able to travel more around the country soon. But this was a private trip that we took to the Aral Sea. We went to Nukus and Moynak, and then I found a 14-kilogram melon that my son was holding there that we ate the next day with our tour group. But the Aral Sea, again, it in some ways it reminds me of the fire crater, in Darvaza in Uzbekistan. Of course, the Aral Sea is a ecological disaster, and it's and there have been very serious consequences, especially for people in Karakol, Pakistan. And I don't want to ever minimize those problems. It's a very serious issue for them. But we went out there to see what was left of the sea, and we found that it was a very beautiful area. And it's a good way, I think, to help some of the people there to go out there and be a tourist to see. And we went and stayed in yurts at the shore of the sea, and we enjoyed it very much. But also here, similar to in Latvia, one of the things that I like most about being the deputy chief of mission is you get to participate in a lot of interesting meetings. So this picture cut off a little bit, but this was a meeting that the ambassador and I and the USAID director had at the foreign ministry with the foreign minister. And then a few weeks after that, the Flex, I think a lot of you have probably heard of the Flex program. Maybe some of you have participated in Flex. I think that's my favorite program in the entire United States government. And we had the Flex program in Kyrgyzstan and in Turkmenistan and in Latvia. So I was fortunate to be able to go and welcome these people to the Flex program and say goodbye to them before they left to go to the United States. And then probably just last month, there was a shipment of Pfizer vaccines that came at the airport, and I went out there with a group of other people to welcome the Pfizer vaccines. And so again, I think one of the best parts of being in this job is that you just get to do a lot of interesting things and meet interesting people, and I get to see the entire embassy, which I think is always it's a lot of fun. But one of the I thought so that that really comes to the end of all my assignments so far in the Foreign Service. But I thought one thing I would mention has been my real interest outside of work is riding my bicycle. And I've been fortunate that I've been able to ride my bicycle. Now, I didn't really ride in Greece or Bangladesh or Kyrgyzstan or Albania. I became much more interested in riding later when right before I got to Turkmenistan. And so I spent a lot of time riding. This was in Chuli, which is a park, a beautiful park right outside of Turkmenistan, or outside of Ashgabat. And then these two pictures were actually taken out near Tashkent, and this one is in Krasnogorsk. And so if you've been out to Krasnogorsk on the hill that overlooks the town, you may have been on this exact same spot. And this was with a group of friends that I met here. And in Latvia, well, and what I would say, what I really like about cycling here is, it's a good way to see other parts of the country like Sukok and Krasnogorsk and Tashkent. Ride out in the countryside and see and meet people out there. And I've been very impressed with how incredibly friendly and hospitable people are out in Tashkent. In the United States, when I'm riding my bike, almost nobody will come up to you if I stop on the street and I'm drinking water or I buy some food. Almost nobody will come up to you and just start talking to you. I think Americans are very friendly people, but they don't come up to people on the street. Whereas in Tashkent and Poletes, I've had all kinds of people come up and introduce themselves and introduce and welcome, invite me to come to their house for tea. So riding bicycle, I found it's just a great way, not just here, but in Turkmenistan and also in Latvia, to meet people. And these were all just pictures from my time in Latvia, from some of the rides that I did there. I did a lot of very long rides in Latvia. There were 2 times that some friends and I, we rode all the way across the country. So in 2018, we started at the border we started at the sea in Ventspils on the Baltic Sea. And then we rode for about 500 kilometers all the way across Latvia. And then 4 days later, we got to the border with Belarus. And then this was also on that trip. One of the people riding with us, his children came and they were holding up the flag. And then the other 2 guys were, of course, photobombing us in the background. And then the other pictures, I think this one, and then the other picture were from a different ride that I did across the country. So I thought it was but again, it was a great place to meet people and to see some interesting things. And it's, you see a lot more of the country when you're riding on a bicycle rather than riding in a car, because you're, of course, going much faster in the car. With a bicycle, you have to stop to get more food and water, and it's much easier to talk to people. So that's been one of my, I think, real highlights. And one of the things that I like best about this job, being in the Foreign Service, is that you don't just get to visit these countries, you actually live there for 2 years. And so you get to meet people, you really get to know the country well, and see a lot of things. And one thing I think that also that Latvia maybe is a little famous for, maybe you can't see it in this picture behind me, that's a stork in that nest. And in Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia have, every summer there are thousands and thousands of storks there, and they live there for the summer. And then in the fall they leave and they go all the way to Africa and spend the winter in Africa where it's a lot warmer. And then they come back, I think, to the same nest the next summer. So I look forward to doing a lot more rides in Uzbekistan. I don't know if I'll be able to ride all the way across Uzbekistan, but maybe I'll try to go from Andijan to Nukus, maybe, or to Organj, and see if I could do that. It's a long ride, but maybe I'll try that before I leave. So that was it for my presentation. I would really welcome, if anybody has any questions or wants to ask anything about other parts where I've worked, or what anything about my jobs in Uzbekistan or anywhere else that I've worked.
Thank you so much, Mr. Poletes. And we have many questions to you, actually. Let's start from the beginning. Do you best is asking, saying, hello, Mr. Paul Poletes. Thank you for inspiring story. I really liked it. What would you advise to do, or what is important for students who study international relations and going to take first steps in this field?
Well, I think you've already taken, I'd say, that probably one of the most important first steps, which is to learn a foreign language. I think what really opened the door to me to joining the Foreign Service was when I studied Russian. And but it would have been the same, I think, if I had learned French or Spanish or any other language. But to learn world languages is very important. And then I also think it's important to have, to read the news. I think it's important to know just what's going on in the world. What's going on now in Ukraine. That's a huge area of interest for us in the State Department in the United States. And then also, I think to read kind of more broadly, maybe more things about history and geopolitics. Why is the United States worried about China, or what is China's role in Central Asia? I think that the rise of China is a hugely important topic. So I think, really the most I'd say important things are to learn some foreign languages and learn them very well. I've been very fortunate that I lived in Moscow before I joined the Foreign Service, so I was able to learn Russian quite well. And that opened a lot of doors for me, because when I got to Kyrgyzstan, the ambassador would come into my office and he knew that I could speak Russian well. And he would say, I need somebody to go with me to this meeting with the new president. And he'd say, Paul, why don't you come with me? And so that was a great opportunity. But I think just knowing, geography, history, geopolitics, and then learning foreign languages. And of course, just being very curious and always being open to, I think being able to listen is a very important skill for diplomats. I think we often go into meetings and we have to speak, we have instructions from Washington or points that we have to give. But I think what's even more important is listening to what the other side has to tell us, what's important to them, because you can't, I think, be an effective diplomat unless you can really listen to what the other side is saying. And that's part of why knowing languages is so important too. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarwarbek Arabayev is saying good evening. Can you elaborate a little bit on the exam you took before starting career in the Foreign Service? Who can take the exam and required degree?
Yeah, so for the United States State Department to become a diplomat like me. So it's a little bit complicated question, because there are Foreign Service generalists like me, and the generalists, we work in, let's say, political affairs, administrative, consular, public affairs. There's political, economic, public affairs, administrative, and then I always leave, and consular. So there are five cones, we call them. And to become a foreign service generalist, and that's like if you want to become an ambassador someday, you usually have to come in as a generalist like I did. So that's a 2-part exam. You have to pass the written exam, which takes about 3 hours, and it has to do with English language, and then lots of questions about history and politics. So you might get a question on there but you even have to know about American culture. So there might be a question about, who is Taylor Swift, but then you might get another question about, it'll have a map, and and certain countries are colored black, and it'll say, well, what organization are all these countries from? And maybe it's OPEC, maybe it's NATO, maybe it's the European Union or the African Union. And so it'll have, a map, and there'll be one country in black, and you have to name that country. So, sometimes you have to know, like, all right, is this Nigeria or Niger? Or maybe it's, or Cameroon. So it pays you have to know a little bit about a lot of different areas. And then if you pass the written exam, they invite you to come and take the oral exam. And that takes just 1 day, but it takes the entire day, and it's in person. And it's I took that in Washington, D.C., and they have different parts to it. But the one part is they give you an assignment, and you have to work with a group to come up with a proposal. And so they give you a pretend country, and we each had to come up with a proposal for how we could help that country. And then when you're working with the group, there are people sitting in each corner of the room, and they're watching you, and they're taking notes on you. So there's a lot of pressure on you. It's very nerve-wracking. And they want to see how well you work with a group. Do you shout at other people, or do you, how well can you speak and present your presentation? And then they have other parts where they're just going to ask you some hypothetical questions about maybe working in an embassy. And they say, well, what would you do if you worked at an embassy? And, maybe they'd say all of the electricity in the capital city went out, and you were in charge of, taking care of all the Americans at the embassy. What would you do? So they ask those kinds of questions. And if you pass that exam, then they put your name on a list, and hopefully, and then when the State Department needs more diplomats, they will pull names off of the list. And so they put my name on the list in November of 1997. And then in March of 1998, they called me and said, we want you to start in July of 1998. And so I did that. And actually, to become a Foreign Service generalist, you don't need any degree. So most people in the Foreign Service have a master's degree, but in fact, you don't need any degree to take the exam. You just have to be an American citizen, and you have to be 21 years old, and that's it. However, if you want to be, we have a lot of people at the embassy who are specialists. We have medical specialists, security specialists, communication specialists. Those people, they all have to have a degree. We have office managers, and all of the specialists, they need to have a degree. They need a bachelor's degree to get hired by the State Department.
Okay, thank you so much. Muhamedov Azizbek is saying that it's amazing experience to learn about my country from Americans.
Well, it's a really good point. I think I've learned a lot by reading what foreigners have written about the United States, because I think there are a lot of things that as an American, I don't even see about my own country. It's almost like asking a fish to tell you about the water. Maybe they can't tell you how the water tastes because they've lived there all the time. And so it's, and I just got here, so I have a lot to learn about Uzbekistan.
Thank you. Yelena Alexeyeva is saying that also we can collaborate for some ecological and other projects.
Well, we have several offices here in the political section. If you send an email to to the mailbox with public affairs, I think we could maybe connect you with the right sections on that, because the climate change and ecological issues are an important priority for us now.
Humayun Mirzo Muidinov is asking to tell a bit more about Flex program that you have mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Well, Gulshan might know more about it, but Flex, it's only open to high school students, and it's a 1 year, and it's actually Flex, Flex. It's the Future Leader Exchange Program, and it's open for high school students, and they spend 1 year in the United States, and they live with a family and go to high school in the United States. It's really a wonderful program. I wish we could bring people from the United States to come here and stay for a year in high school. And we do have such programs, but not from the State Department. They're private programs. But our public affairs section, there's probably information on the website about Flex.
Yes, exactly. So you can
It's a
check
super program.
Right. You can check information on the website, or you can email us and we'll give you more links to go to. All right. Our next question. As a diplomat, what is the best country for you to serve in, and what makes a good country to serve in?
People ask me that question a lot, and it's a very difficult question, because I really liked every place that we worked, but we liked different things about different places. I think, but maybe if I had to pick one place to go back to, I'd probably would pick Greece, because I have relatives there, and it was the first. And what I liked about Greece was you could go to the islands, you could go to the sea, and you could go to the mountains. I'd like to take my bicycle to Greece and ride there, but I think that it's very easy for me. It's very hard to name one country that would be the best place or most interesting, because every place there were really interesting things to do and good people at the embassy. But it's sort of easier to name like particular things that we really found interesting about different places. I think like for probably, the one thing that I remember perhaps the most from Albania was that I had my children were both there with us, and they were very young. And so that really shaped a lot of what we did there. In Kyrgyzstan, there was a lot of political instability there, and we were there just with my daughter. My son was only there for about 5 months before we left. And so it's a little bit different from each country. But I think if you ask anyone in the Foreign Service, they have a hard time answering that question, because there were, some people will have a really bad experience in some places. Oh, and I think part of your question was what might make a place maybe better than others. And I think, obviously, if you're there with a family, you want the place to be safe. And I think safety is really important. We do have a lot of places where you can't go with your family. Like if you were to go to Baghdad now, or to Peshawar or Karachi, you can't go with your family. And the State Department does a lot to protect people. But I think if you're there with your family, then having a safe place is very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Next question from Do Your Best. How would you evaluate or see the future of relationships between the U.S. and Uzbekistan?
Well, I mean, no doubt that I think as with every country, there are kind of ups and downs. And I think right now we're at very high up part, and I see it continuing to go higher. I think this year we had our first ever strategic partnership dialogue, and we've had bilateral consultations every year for the past 12 years with Uzbekistan, but we changed the name and changed not just the name but the status of those talks this year. We call them strategic partnership dialogue now. And when you look at whether it's with our public affairs programs, USAID programs, security cooperation, everything keeps getting a little bit higher every year. And so I see a very bright future for the United States and Uzbekistan. I think we have a lot of common interests and a lot of things we can work on together. And I know there are a lot of parts of the United States government that are very eager to work here. and we hear the same thing from our partners here in Uzbekistan. So that's the future, bright, very bright future, I think.
Thank you. Next question. You mentioned that you speak Russian. Are there any other languages you speak? And what are your tips for those who learn other languages?
So I'd say, I learned how to speak Bangla, Flas Sheep. I speak Albanian. Milao Linika, I speak Greek. Latviski, Zino Latvia Shuvalodu, I speak Latvian, Uzbek Tilana Gapraman. And men Toshkentdan, Aldin men Washingtonda, Uzbek Tilana Organganman. And so, but we're very lucky at the State Department. We have a diplomatic academy there, and we have teachers from Uzbekistan, from Turkmenistan, from Latvia, from Greece. So unfortunately, I left from Greece and I left from Albania, and then I forgot a lot of language that I learned there. Russian, very hard for me to forget because we speak Russian sometimes at home. I lived in Russia. I lived in Kyrgyzstan. So, but I think that what I found really is the most helpful is just to put yourself in an opportunity where you have to speak the language. And that's what I did when I lived in Moscow. I had a job there. I worked at the American embassy there, but I was not a diplomat. I worked on a private contract, but I had to speak every day with Russians who couldn't speak English. So it forced me to speak for the compliment, but I had to speak Russian every day. And so the problem, a lot of times when Americans, they get to the embassy, everyone at the embassy speaks English. So it's much easier for me when I come down and speak with Gulshan, it's much easier for me to speak English. And so I don't get as much practice. But if I go out on my bicycle to Tashkent, I get a lot of practice speaking Uzbek out there. But I think that the best tip is read a lot because it helps build your vocabulary. But also, YouTube is a great resource because you can watch videos and you can pause them, and sometimes there are subtitles. And then just find opportunities to speak whatever language you're trying to learn, English or German or Georgian, Albanian. Try to find opportunities to speak it with people who don't speak your language, and then you have to speak it. So.
Okay, thank you so much. What are your plans for future? And is there any country you would like to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in 2023, I will have to decide where I want to go next because my assignment here will end in 2024. And usually about 10 months before we leave, then we decide where we want to go next. So I think probably go back to the United States. I haven't worked in the United States. I mean, I was there for 1 year before we came here, but I was at home the whole time, and I was studying Uzbek on Zoom. And then before we went to Latvia, we lived in the United States, but I was studying Latvian. So I haven't actually worked inside the State Department building since 2012 when I left from the Central Asia Affairs Office. But my son will graduate from high school here. He'll be ready for college. So it would be a good time, I think, to go back to the United States. But what I found is it's very hard to predict it's hard to predict the future for anything, but especially for the Foreign Service, because you just don't know which assignments might come open. Somebody might ask me to go work somewhere else. So we'll see. But probably, most likely, I'll end up back in the United States. And I think if there was one place that I could probably go work, maybe it would be Norway, I think, because I've traveled in Norway quite a few times. I have relatives in Norway. So my family, maybe fairly typical American family. My father's family was all from Greece, and my mother's family, her parents were born in the United States, but then her grandparents were all born in Norway, and so I have relatives in Norway, and I've never actually I met one of them in the United States when he came to visit. But Norway is just an amazingly beautiful country. It would be a good place, I think, to go and work.
Wow, great. Yıldız Narzikulova is asking, how many countries have you been to?
That's a great question. I haven't added up all of them for a while, but I'd say probably about 60, because when I lived in Moscow, before I went to Moscow, I had only been to Canada for a few days, and then I went to Mexico one time for a few hours. And then when I got to Moscow, we were able to travel a lot. And then once I got into the Foreign Service, was able to take a lot of trips. I'd say probably about 60, maybe 65.
Thank you. What is your favorite U.S. state?
Wow, that's one of the I would say one of the downsides of being in the Foreign Service is you spend a lot of time outside the United States, and so it's not easy to there's a lot of parts. The United States obviously is a very big country, and there's a lot of parts of the United States I've never been to. I've never really been down in the South. I've never been to Mississippi or South Carolina or Louisiana. I've never been to Texas. I've never been to Montana. So my favorite state, I'd probably say my home state, maybe South Dakota, just because it's beautiful. There's a lot of things to do there. There's some, it's kind of a newer state, so it's not as old or historic, we'll say, as say maybe Virginia, but actually, in some ways, South Dakota, the history there, though, there's a lot more history from American Indians, from Native Americans there, because they were still there for much longer than, let's say, in Virginia or the East Coast. You've got a lot of beautiful nature, like the Badlands, the Black Hills. My mother lives there. My sister and her family live there. So, but I also, my state now, Virginia, in some ways, it's a little bit like Greece. You can go to the ocean, you can go to the sea in the morning, then go up into the mountains. And Virginia is also a beautiful state. But there's I finally made it to the Grand Canyon in 2016. I'd love to go and see that again. I've never been to Utah. I'd love to go and visit Utah. There's a lot of places in the United States I'd like to go see.
Thank you. And next question is about biking. Do you think Tashkent is biking friendly city? And what can be do to improve situation for bikers in Tashkent?
Yeah, I think that Tashkent is, I personally don't think it's a very bicycle friendly city yet. I think that, I see a lot of people riding bicycles, but what I find is when in the summer when I got here and in the fall, I would ride my bike a lot in Tashkent, but only early in the morning before the traffic, because there's just too much traffic. And I find that there are a lot of taxis and marshutkas here, and they're always pulling over very suddenly, and it makes it hard to drive. But there are some very nice roads. Like I live in Mirzo Ulugh district, and the street Mirzo Ulugh is a nice, you take that down, or Dormon street is nice. The street that goes out past Yangi Uzbekistan Park is a beautiful road. If you go early in the morning, the traffic, Tashkent is like any big city where I've ever gone in. It's kind of dangerous for cyclists to ride their bikes, let's say in Washington, D.C., or even in South Dakota in the middle of town on a busy street during the day. So I find that it's better to ride early in the morning, and then it's perfectly safe. It's a very nice place to ride because the streets are in pretty good shape on some of the bigger streets, and they're interesting. I really like riding around like Amir Timur Square. It's a beautiful, you've got the Amir Timur Museum, and then the park in the middle, and then the big hotel, and then there's I forget what the other big building is there, and there's the law school, I think, near there. It's a beautiful area. I think that in any city, the best thing that they can do for cyclists to make it safe is to make a special bicycle lane on the side of the road, but not just with a painted line. You actually have to put like a barrier so that the cars cannot go into the lane, because what they found in the United States is if you just paint the lane, cars will drive into it anyway. But in Denmark, like Copenhagen is and Amsterdam are often seen as the most bicycle friendly cities in the entire world. And there they actually have a separate lane for bicycles. And that I think makes a huge difference. But, I do see some real improvements in Tashkent. The sidewalk in front of the defense ministry on Mirza Ulugh, there's a special lane there for bicycles. And I see in the summer, many families are out there, pushing babies in their stroller, and then their children are riding on bicycles on the special bike lane. So, I mean, that's a huge improvement. And you really see that if you build good infrastructure, people will come out and use it. It makes a big difference.
Thank you, sir. And I think we'll take probably the last question. Sardor Manonov is asking, what kind of books would you recommend to read about international relations and geopolitics?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's just so many books out there, and it's I apologize for looking at my phone, but I'm going to look at my Kindle library for a second, and then I will tell you, see which books I have on here. There's I think it's really important to read a really broad range of opinions. So you want to see some people that may be critical of the government. And so there's a book by Stephen Walt called The Hell of Good Intentions. And I found that was a good book about, and he can be quite critical about American foreign policy. But there's also, trying to find the other book. There's a book by John Mearsheimer that I had read. It's called The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. And I found that was a good book simply because it teaches a lot about international relations theory and how great powers relate to one another. And Mearsheimer is a realist. And so under the realist school, they will tell you that states will act aggressively to defend their interests, and that if one state, impinges on the interests of another state, then that state will react. And so I thought that was a good book to learn more about how states might react. There's a good book called The Future is History by Masha Gessen, and she talks about sort of how what things have happened in Russia during the Putin era. I've got a lot of books on this Kindle library that I enjoy reading about foreign affairs, but I also have read a lot of books just about different areas. There's the man who ran Washington. That's a book about the former Secretary of State James Baker. There's a lot of great history in there about the end of the Cold War and sort of his negotiations with Gorbachev and with the Soviet Union about that time. Trying to look what else. Yeah, I've got usually there's a lot of good books about international relations. I just have a hard time finding them on here right now. But there's a good book. Armageddon Averted. I'd say any book by Stephen Kotkin is really good. Armageddon Averted was about the history of the end of the Cold War and how the United States and the Soviet Union and the United States and Russia in the 90s really took some very important steps to reduce the risk of nuclear war. And I thought that was a really good book because it really explains how dangerous the situation was and how they worked to reduce that risk. Another good book that I really liked it's by Ben Rhodes, and he was an advisor to President Obama. And his book, The World as It Is And what I tell people about that book is you don't have to agree or disagree with President Obama with his policy, but what I really liked about it was that it does a great job of explaining how foreign policy in the United States really gets made at the highest levels in the White House. It was a great look inside the White House and how policy is made. Um, Another book I really liked was called Super Predictors, and that is a book about really just talks about how difficult it is to make predictions, but how some people have learned to make very accurate predictions. And he talks about the difference between people that just make guesses and people who actually are good at predicting things. So those are some of my favorite books on international affairs and other things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I know I told you that it's going to be the last question, but we have a couple of more great questions. So if you don't mind.
Sure.
Have you ever regretted choosing the career of diplomat?
That is a really wonderful question, because I think that a lot of people, they think of all of the good things about a career and they don't think about the negative things. And I don't say that I never really regretted choosing the career, but every year I become a little bit more aware of sort of the downsides or the negatives. And it's a great opportunity to live in other countries and for my kids to study and live in other countries. But you do miss a lot of family events. You miss a lot of important holidays. You miss weddings. It's very expensive to fly back to the United States, especially with a whole family. And so a lot of my friends got married and I couldn't go. Sometimes I missed funerals. And then sometimes, I think everybody you kind of miss. Now, when I'm here at the embassy, I'm kind of it's like being in the United States in some ways. Everyone speaks English here. We have a little store where I can go buy some American products. But sometimes you miss hearing the language. You miss being able to go, eat foods that especially like if you are from Uzbekistan and you go to South Dakota, you're not going to find samsi. You're not going to find, a lot of Uzbek food there. So I think that the hardest thing for a lot of diplomats is they miss their families. They miss a lot of events. And also, if you're married, what is your spouse going to do? Sometimes we have a lot of families here where both people work in the embassy, but sometimes there aren't enough jobs. And so one person can't find a job inside the embassy. And so, and we have some people where you have a diplomat, but their husband or wife is a doctor or a lawyer, and then they can't work when they leave the United States. And so they have to, sometimes you have to give up your career. I'd say those are some big sacrifices, but for the most part, the State Department works hard to make sure that it's a family-friendly career. And so I have very few regrets, but sometimes it can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very good question.
Yeah. Question from Dior. Does the embassy provide internships or volunteering for students so they could combine learned materials with practice? There probably is more information about that on our website. I'm not certain about that. Yeah. And actually, American Center Tashkent advertises positions for interns for students. So just check the website. And I think we can finish with this one. Jawahir Kamiljanov. What is the most important part of your hard work which pushed your career a step forward? I think learning Russian was a huge step, simply because when I was in Kyrgyzstan, it allowed me to go to a lot of meetings with the ambassador and with visitors, and that was my first job in a political section. So when you come into the Foreign Service, you have to choose which track you want to go on, of public affairs or consular, management. And I chose political. And so
your first two assignments, a lot of times you won't get to work in your specialty track. So finally in Kyrgyzstan I did. And just a lot of interesting things happened there. There was a lot of political instability. And I think just getting to work with good people there, I really admired the ambassador and the deputy chief of mission and the people in my section. But I'd say learning a language well, because we all have to learn languages, but it's very easy to get to the country and then hardly use the language. Like in Latvia, I could get by pretty well without speaking Latvian very much. So learning a language, and Russian actually is a very useful language because you can use it in the European Bureau, you can use it in the South Central Asia Bureau, you can use it in Ukraine, Moscow, Bishkek, Tashkent. So that really helped. But I think also what really is very important to doing well in this career is to getting a wide experience and learning different, so I worked in Greece, I worked in the consular section, I worked in the administrative section, and then I worked in public affairs. I worked in Washington, I've worked out in different countries. I worked in Europe, I worked in Bangladesh, I worked in Central Asia. I'd say getting a broad experience so that you can see how, because I think what people forget is that, if you spending time in Central Asia can actually teach you a lot of things when you get to Latvia, or learning or working in Latvia or Greece can teach you things about Central Asia. It's really important to have a broad view and to understand. And so I think having worked in a broad mix of different places also was very helpful for my career. And finally, I think it's really important to have mentors. If you meet somebody that you really get along with and you admire that person, and that person's maybe more senior to you, they can really give you a lot of good advice and they can help you later on in your career. They can help you get jobs maybe later, but they can also give you advice. And I found that that's been really important also.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for sharing with us all the information. And it was so useful and interesting to learn. And we wish you further success in your career and life. And we hope we'll do another chai chat with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Всем спасибо, Katar Ahmad. It was very interesting. And thank you for these were really thoughtful, very good questions. I really appreciate it. I think that I could tell from the questions is a very knowledgeable, serious audience that really takes this seriously, and I appreciate that they were. I mean, I've done a lot of similar sessions, but I don't think I've ever received such good questions from the audience. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I look
thanks,
forward
everyone.
to doing this again. Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye.